"Human, is this enough to buy a husband?" The alien princess asked. Holding 3 tokens, the intergalactic city of Zalaris gleamed under the stars, a place where beings from countless worlds mingled, their cultures as diverse as the galaxies they hailed from. Amidst this bustling metropolis, in a grand palace designed to reflect the superiority of her species, stood Princess Ariella of the Xanthi. She was tall and graceful, with skin that shimmered like the night sky and eyes that glowed with the wisdom of ages. Her race, the Xanthi, were one of the most advanced civilizations in the universe. They had mastered technologies that other species could only dream of, and their warriors were said to be unmatched in strength and skill. Ariella, born into this legacy of power, had always been surrounded by the finest of everything, never knowing true struggle or challenge. It was in this context of superiority that she first met Derek, a human who, by all accounts, seemed far less impressive than the towering figures of her world. He was small, with pale skin and dark hair, dressed simply in the attire of his people. The humans were remnants of an ancient race that had fought off a fierce enemy and survived against all odds. Ariella had heard stories of their bravery, but those stories had seemed more like tales than reality. At first, she dismissed him as just another fragile human. Her people had long considered humans inferior, their strength and endurance nothing compared to the grandeur of the Xanthi. But there was something in Derek's eyes that intrigued her. It was not strength that radiated from him, but a quiet determination, a resolve that she had never seen in any of the powerful beings around her. And that intrigued her more than she cared to admit. During one of the grand celebrations held in the palace, Ariella found herself seated at a table full of Xanthi nobles, their laughter echoing through the hall as they discussed the many conquests of their species. Derek, sitting at the far end of the room, seemed out of place among them. His eyes occasionally flickered over to Ariella, and there was something in the way he watched her, not with awe, but with an unsettling calmness. Ariella, ever the princess, decided to test him. She leaned over to one of her closest advisors, a tall, dark-skinned warrior named Zorak, and whispered, "What do you think of him?" Zorak, ever loyal, glanced over at Derek and then back at Ariella. "He is human, Your Highness, nothing special." Ariella nodded, but her curiosity only grew. She had heard of humans' endurance, their ability to push through pain, their survival instinct in the face of impossible odds. Still, it seemed so foreign to her. Her people, the Xanthi, had long ago perfected their physical forms and minds. They never knew what it was like to struggle for survival. It was simply beneath them. She turned back to Derek, her gaze now harder as if to challenge him. To test if the stories about humans were true or just fantasies spun by those who had never seen a true battle. Ariella's voice, smooth and regal, carried across the room as she addressed Derek directly. "Human," she said, her tone laced with a playful yet mocking quality. "Is it true that you humans claim to be resilient, that you can endure pain and suffering far beyond what any of us could imagine?" Derek looked up at her, his face unreadable. "That's what they say," he answered simply, his voice steady. Ariella smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "If that's true, then prove it." A few of the nobles looked on, intrigued, sensing a challenge in the air. Ariella's challenge was nothing more than a jest, of course. She knew no human could possibly match the strength and skill of the Xanth. But there was something about Derek's calmness that made her want to see if he could truly live up to the myth. "How about this?" she continued, leaning forward, her voice now a little more serious. "I will give you the opportunity to prove yourself in a way none of your kind ever has before, a test of survival." Derek raised an eyebrow, intrigued, though still cautious. "And what kind of test would that be?" Ariella's eyes glinted with a new intensity. "You will face an army of my choosing, alone, survive, and I will personally acknowledge that your species has something to offer the galaxy." The room fell silent at her words. Zorak shifted uncomfortably, but Ariella paid him no mind. She was determined to put her challenge into motion, to prove once and for all that the human species was nothing more than a relic of a forgotten age. Derek stood up slowly, his posture rigid, but his expression was calm. He wasn't angry, nor was he fearful. Instead, there was a quiet resolve, as if he had already accepted the challenge the moment it was issued. He nodded once, and his voice, though soft, carried the weight of someone who knew he had nothing left to lose. "I'll do it," he said, his words simple, but they hung in the air, heavy with the unspoken promise of whatever came next. Ariella's smile widened. Very well, she said, standing as well. Prepare yourself, human. The army will be waiting for you. The challenge was set and the countdown began. Ariella turned to Zorak, who had already begun to prepare the necessary arrangements. Make sure the conditions are appropriate for a test of survival, she said, her voice cold but laced with an edge of excitement. She couldn't help herself. She was eager to see how long the human would last. As Derek walked out of the hall, his eyes focused ahead, Ariella couldn't help but feel a strange sense of anticipation. She had seen countless warriors come and go, their battles legendary in the history of the Scifi. But this was different. Derek was human, and that alone made this challenge all the more interesting. Would he crumble under the pressure as all her kind expected him to? Or would he, in some surprising way, prove that there was something to humanity beyond what the Scifi had ever understood? The sun had barely risen on the planet's horizon, but the grand palace of Zalaris was already alive with movement. In the royal chambers, Ariella stood by a large window, her eyes scanning the vast city below. The Scifi city stretched as far as the eye could see, its towering spires glinting in the early morning light. It was a city of perfection, of progress, and of dominance, filled with beings who had never known true hardship. Yet even in such a city, Ariella felt a deep loneliness, a feeling she could not quite understand. Her people were the most powerful civilization in the galaxy. They had conquered worlds, shattered the strongest of armies, and lived in peace for centuries. But in all their wealth and power, Ariella had found no companionship. Her title had brought her admirers, but none who truly saw her for who she was. Her people were too focused on their superiority to care about matters of the heart. Derek, on the other hand, was human, small, frail in comparison to the Scifi, and yet something about him intrigued her. It wasn't his physicality, for he was no match for her people's strength. It wasn't even his charm. He lacked the glint of confidence that often attracted the best of the galaxy's elites. No, it was his quiet resolve, his ability to stand tall in the face of things that were far beyond his control. Ariella couldn't explain it, but something about him made her want to see if his resilience was more than just a story. As she turned away from the window, she couldn't shake the thought of the challenge she had set for Derek. He had agreed to face the army, but she wondered if he truly understood the gravity of what he was about to face. The Scifi warriors were unlike anything humans could imagine. Their strength, speed, and coordination were honed over centuries. Derek was walking into something that would likely end in his death. But that was the point. He had claimed his species was resilient. She wanted to see if it was true. Meanwhile, Derek was alone in his quarters, preparing for the battle ahead. His heart raced as the reality of the situation began to settle in. The princess had not been joking. He was about to face a whole army alone, and the consequences of failure were clear. Yet, despite the fear that gnawed at him, Derek wasn't backing down. He had spent most of his life proving that he could survive. His people, despite their weaknesses, had endured hardships that should have wiped them from existence. If there was one thing Derek knew about himself, it was that he refused to be defeated, no matter the odds. He looked at the weapons provided to him, primitive compared to what the Scifi used. A simple plasma rifle and a few knives. But there was something that the Scifi didn't have, something that the human race had always carried with them. The drive to survive no matter what. Derek had seen what humans could do when backed into a corner, when every part of them was tested beyond belief. They didn't give up, not ever. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. It was Zorak, the Scifi warrior who had been assigned to oversee the challenge. Zorak's towering frame filled the doorway as he stepped inside, his dark skin gleaming with an almost otherworldly glow. He didn't say a word as he approached Derek, but simply handed him a small data pad. "The challenge will begin soon," Zorak said, his voice low and calm, yet with an edge of something that Derek couldn't place. "The army is ready. The planet has been set as the arena." Derek nodded, trying to calm his racing heart. "I'm ready," he said, though he didn't feel it. He had no choice but to be ready. There was no way back now. Zorak studied him for a moment, his glowing eyes narrowing. "Do not take this lightly, human. This is not a game. You're facing warriors who have never lost a battle." Derek met his gaze, his jaw tightening. "I'm not planning on losing." Zorak said nothing more, only gave a small, approving nod before leaving Derek to prepare for what was to come. As the door closed behind him, Derek took a deep breath and allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. The odds were stacked against him, but he had to keep going. He couldn't let fear take control. Hours later, Derek was standing in the center of a desolate battlefield, his senses heightened. The air was thick with the smell of dust and metal. The ground beneath his feet was cracked and uneven, evidence of past battles fought on this very planet. In the distance, he could hear the hum of engines and the metallic clinking of armor. He wasn't alone. He gripped his plasma rifle tightly, waiting. Then through the haze of dust they appeared, an army of Scifi soldiers, each one towering and clad in shimmering battle armor. Their leader, a fierce warrior named Korath, stepped forward, his eyes glowing with an unsettling intensity. Korath was the fiercest of them all, and his reputation was legendary. He had wiped out entire fleets with his bare hands. Derek's grip tightened on his rifle as Korath's gaze fixed on him. "Human," Korath said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to shake the ground beneath them. "You are about to face an army. Do not expect mercy. We fight to win." Derek didn't reply. He had no words left. His only option now was to survive. Without warning, the army charged. Derek fired his plasma rifle, the blast barely slowing the first few soldiers. They were fast, almost too fast, but Derek had trained for this. He had faced overwhelming odds before on his homeworld, where survival meant outsmarting the stronger, faster threats around him. He ducked behind a ruined building, his heart pounding, his mind racing. The battle raged on, with Derek darting in and out of cover, using the environment to his advantage. He wasn't the strongest, but he was quick, and he had the ability to think on his feet. One by one, the Scifi soldiers fell, their advanced technology not enough to overcome his ingenuity. Korath watched from the back of the battlefield, a deep amusement flickering in his eyes. He had expected the human to die quickly, as they always did in his past encounters with weaker species. But Derek was different. The human's determination was unlike anything he had ever seen before. Despite being vastly outnumbered, Derek fought with the heart of someone who would never give up. He refused to be defeated. Ariella watched the battle unfold from a distance, her heart pounding in her chest. She had expected this to be a formality, something to entertain the nobles and prove her point about the frailty of humans. But now, as she watched Derek fight with everything he had, she felt something stir inside her. This wasn't just about winning or losing anymore. It was about proving something deeper, something she hadn't expected. Derek was fighting for more than his life. He was fighting for the very essence of what it meant to be human. And in that moment, Ariella saw it. She saw the strength that no Scifi technology, no amount of power could ever match. It was something human. It was heart. The battle raged on, and Derek had lost track of time. He was exhausted, his body battered and bruised from the relentless onslaught of the Scifi soldiers. His plasma rifle was overheating, the barrel glowing red from overuse, and his hands were sore from gripping it so tightly. He had already taken down several soldiers, but they just kept coming. Every time one fell, another took its place. Derek knew he couldn't keep this up forever, but he refused to back down. The stakes were higher now than ever. This was no longer just about survival. It was about proving something, about showing the Scifi and maybe even himself that he wasn't just a weak human. His legs ached, and his breath came in sharp gasps as he moved from one piece of cover to another, darting behind the wreckage of a broken building. The roar of the soldiers, engines, and the sound of their boots pounding the ground echoed through the ruins. Derek's eyes scanned the area, trying to find an opening, a way to outsmart his enemies. His mind was sharp, even if his body was faltering. Behind him, he could hear the sounds of the battle, but they felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. His focus was on the next soldier, the next move. He couldn't afford to think about anything else. The moment he allowed himself to slip, it could all be over. His training, the stories he had heard about human resilience, everything would be proven wrong. But Derek had one thing that the Scifi didn't, his ability to think outside the box. They were warriors, skilled in combat, but they fought with a sense of predictability. Derek wasn't bound by tradition or formal training. He could adapt, improvise, and most importantly, he could outlast them. He ducked behind a wall, taking a brief moment to catch his breath. Sweat dripped down his forehead, his chest heaving. As he wiped it away with the back of his hand, he saw movement in the distance. The Scifi soldiers were closing in, and he could already see Korath at the front of their line. Korath's eyes glowed with a fierce light, his posture full of confidence. He believed Derek would fall soon. He had always believed that no one could withstand the might of the Xanthi for long. Derek took a deep breath and pushed himself up, moving again, his legs trembling with every step. He checked his weapon, noting that the plasma rifle was nearly useless now. He had a few more shots, but that would never be enough to win this. He had to think of something else, something bold. His eyes scanned the battlefield once more. That's when he saw it. The Xanthi soldiers had spread out, their formation designed to trap him in a corner, but there was a flaw in it. They were too confident. They underestimated him. With a grunt, Derek dashed toward a pile of wreckage just ahead. As he moved, he triggered a series of small explosives he had planted earlier, using the environment to his advantage. The explosions shook the ground, throwing Xanthi soldiers off balance. Derek used the chaos to his advantage, sprinting across the battlefield, dodging and weaving between obstacles. His heart was pounding in his chest, but he pushed through the fear. He knew this was his moment. Korath roared in frustration as his soldiers scrambled to regain control. Derek didn't give them a chance. He was faster, more agile than they anticipated. As the dust from the explosion settled, he sprinted directly at Korath, closing the distance between them. Korath's eyes narrowed as Derek approached, his weapon raised. But Derek wasn't aiming for Korath's chest or his head. Instead, he ducked low, using his speed and momentum to slide beneath Korath's guard. Korath swung his weapon, but Derek was already past him, slamming into the Xanthi warrior's side and knocking him off balance. It wasn't a perfect hit, but it was enough to disrupt Korath's focus. The battle had become a blur of motion. Derek was no longer just a man fighting for his life. He was a force of nature, a relentless human spirit refusing to be crushed by the weight of the world. From the distance, Ariella watched in awe. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw Derek move with such speed and determination. The human was surviving against impossible odds, and not only that, he was thriving. She had always believed in the strength of the Xanthi, but this was different. She had underestimated Derek, and now, with every move he made, she realized just how wrong she had been. Her heart raced as she watched him dodge, fight, and outwit the Xanthi soldiers. He was no longer the fragile human she had thought him to be. He was something more, something stronger than she had ever imagined. Ariella felt a strange pull in her chest. She had grown up among the most powerful beings in the galaxy, but in this moment it was Derek's resilience, his will to survive, that held her attention. The battle continued, but Derek's resolve only seemed to grow stronger. As the hours passed, the soldiers began to fall back, their confidence shaken. They had never faced an opponent like this, a human who refused to yield no matter how many times they knocked him down. It was clear now, Derek wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something much more profound, the belief that humanity had value, that they were more than just a forgotten race. Korath, who had been watching from the sidelines, finally stepped forward. His massive form loomed over the battlefield, and his presence commanded respect. He was the leader, the strongest of the Xanthi, and it was his duty to end this challenge. "Enough," he bellowed. "This human has proven his resilience, but resilience alone is not enough. Strength is what matters, and I am the strongest." Derek looked up at him, his breath heavy, his body aching. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to stop now. He lifted his weapon, though it was barely functional, and faced Korath with a defiant look in his eyes. "You may be strong," Derek said, his voice steady despite the pain. "But strength isn't just about muscle, it's about heart, and I've got more heart than any of you." Korath growled, stepping forward, but as he did, something strange happened. The Xanthi soldiers, once loyal and eager to follow their leader's command, hesitated. They had seen Derek fight. They had seen his heart. And for the first time, they weren't so sure that strength alone would win the battle. Ariella's eyes widened as she understood. Derek had won more than just the battle. He had won something deeper, respect. Not just from his enemies, but from the very heart of her people. She had underestimated him, but now she saw him for who he truly was. Not weak, not fragile, but strong in ways she had never imagined. As Derek and Korath prepared for their final clash, the tension in the air was thick. It wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for dignity, for respect, for the belief that humans had something to offer the galaxy beyond their perceived weakness. The crowd of Xanthi soldiers waited, their eyes fixed on the two combatants. The moment had arrived. Would Derek, the human who had defied all odds, emerge victorious? Or would the power of the Xanthi, the strength of their centuries-old legacy, prove too much? Ariella's heart raced as she waited, the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. She knew that whatever happened next would change everything. Derek had already proven his worth. Now it was time to see just how far his human spirit could go. Derek's muscles screamed in protest with every movement. His body was battered, his breath ragged, but he refused to stop. The battle had lasted for hours, and he knew that his time was running out. His plasma rifle was nearly useless now, its power drained, and his body was covered in cuts and bruises from the relentless assaults. Yet his mind remained sharp. He could still think. He could still fight. And that was all that mattered. Across the battlefield, Korath, the Xanthi commander, stood tall and unshaken. His massive figure loomed over the battlefield, a symbol of power and authority. He was the strongest of his kind, a leader forged in the fires of countless battles. His eyes glowed with a fierce intensity as he watched Derek, his opponent. Despite the odds, despite the injuries, the human had not fallen. Instead, he had fought with a tenacity that Korath could not ignore. Derek's resilience was unlike anything he had ever seen. Korath was not accustomed to failure. He had crushed armies with ease, decimated fleets, and conquered worlds. Yet in this moment, facing a human, an insignificant species in his eyes, he found himself uncertain. He could feel the shifting mood of his soldiers. They were no longer as confident as they had been when the battle began. Derek had won their respect, something Korath had never imagined possible. The Xanthi warriors were used to dominating their enemies, to striking fear into the hearts of those they faced. But Derek had shown them something else. He had shown them heart. The human's ability to endure, to keep fighting even when the battle seemed lost, was something Korath couldn't fully understand. It was something the Xanthi had long ago abandoned. Their society was built on strength and efficiency, but Derek's strength was something deeper. Ariella stood at the edge of the battlefield, her eyes fixed on Derek. Her heart raced as she watched him move, his every action filled with purpose. She had never seen anything like this before. Her people, the Xanthi, were powerful. Their warriors were unmatched, but Derek, he was different. He wasn't just fighting to survive. He was fighting for something far more important. He was fighting for dignity, for pride, and for the belief that his species had something to offer the galaxy. Ariella's thoughts swirled as she watched Derek struggle to stay on his feet, his body drenched in sweat, his chest heaving with exhaustion. But even in his state, he refused to give up. She had expected him to fall hours ago. She had expected him to crumble under the weight of the Xanthi's might. But he hadn't. She felt a stirring in her chest, something she hadn't felt before. Something she hadn't even realized she had been missing. Derek's persistence reminded her of something she had lost, a sense of purpose, a sense of what it meant to fight not for power, but for something far more precious. He was showing her the strength that came not from physical might, but from the will to survive, the will to keep going, no matter how impossible it seemed. The Xanthi soldiers, who had once mocked Derek for his humanity, were now watching him with a different kind of respect. They had seen him fall and get back up. They had seen him face impossible odds and keep fighting. And they were starting to realize that this human, this so-called weak, fragile creature, had something that they did not. Korath stepped forward, his massive form blocking Derek's path. His weapon was drawn, ready for the final strike. The time for games was over. Korath was going to end this. Derek looked up at him, his eyes meeting the Xanthi commander's glowing gaze. His breath was shallow, but his eyes were clear. He was tired, so tired, but he wasn't done, not yet. "You fought well, human," Korath said, his voice deep and thunderous. "But this is where it ends." Derek didn't flinch. He stood tall, even as his body trembled with exhaustion. "I'm not done yet," he said, his voice firm despite the pain. Korath let out a low laugh. "You humans are resilient, I'll give you that, but resilience alone won't win this battle." Derek's gaze didn't waver. "Maybe not, but it's enough for me." The two combatants stood facing each other, the tension in the air thick with anticipation. Ariella watched from a distance, her heart racing. She had never imagined that this battle would turn out like this. She had thought Derek would be crushed easily, a small human in the face of a superior force. But now, as she watched him stand against Korath, she realized that she had underestimated him. In that moment, Ariella saw something in Derek that she had never seen in any of her own people. He wasn't fighting for glory or for power. He was fighting for something far more important. His survival, his dignity, and the belief that humanity still had something to offer the universe. Korath moved first, his weapon raised, aiming directly at Derek. But Derek was quick. He dodged, rolling to the side as Korath's strike missed. Derek's hand shot out, grabbing a discarded Scifi weapon from the ground. He didn't have the strength to make a perfect strike, but he didn't need to. He only needed to keep moving. Korath was faster, his strikes coming with incredible force, but Derek was relentless. He weaved and dodged, using his agility to avoid the worst of the blows. He didn't have the luxury of standing toe-to-toe with Korath. He couldn't outfight the Scifi leader. But he could outlast him. The two warriors danced around the battlefield, a blur of motion. Korath was powerful, his every move sending shockwaves through the air, but Derek was quick, his human instincts guiding him through each attack. He had nothing left to lose. He couldn't afford to think about the pain or the fear. He just had to keep going. Ariella watched in silence as the battle unfolded before her. She had seen many battles in her life, but this one was different. This wasn't just a fight for victory. It was a fight for survival, for pride, and for something deeper, something that she couldn't quite understand but couldn't deny. Derek's movements grew slower, his energy draining with every passing second. Korath's strikes were becoming more precise, more deadly. But Derek refused to stop. He refused to give in, and then in a flash of movement it happened. Derek saw an opening. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He darted forward, his weapon aimed at Korath's exposed side. In one swift motion, Derek drove the weapon into the commander's armor, striking deep. Korath staggered back, surprised by the sudden attack. His eyes flashed with anger as he looked down at the wound, but Derek didn't stop. He followed through, using all the strength he had left to press the attack. Korath's eyes widened, realizing too late that Derek had won. The human had done the impossible. He had beaten the mighty Korath. The battle was over. Derek stood over the fallen commander, his body trembling, but his eyes were filled with quiet triumph. He had done it. He had survived. He had proven that humanity had something more to offer than just strength. It was something far more powerful, something that could not be defeated by brute force alone. Ariella's heart raced as she realized what had just happened. Derek had won. He had defeated the strongest of the Scifi, not through raw power, but through the strength of his spirit. She walked slowly toward him, her eyes softening as she looked at the human who had just changed everything. Derek, breathing heavily, turned to face her. "I told you I wasn't done." Ariella smiled, the first genuine smile she had shown in a long time. "No, you're not done yet." And for the first time, Ariella knew that Derek had proven something far more important than his strength. He had proven that humanity's spirit could never be broken. Not by anything, and not by anyone. Derek's legs wobbled beneath him as he stood over the fallen body of Korath. His hands were trembling, his chest heaving for air, and every muscle in his body screamed in protest. He was exhausted. His body was broken, but his heart was still beating with determination. He had done it. Against all odds, he had survived the impossible. Korath, the mighty Scifi leader, lay motionless on the ground, the light fading from his glowing eyes. Derek couldn't believe it. The battle had taken everything he had, but somehow in that final moment he had found the strength to strike. It wasn't just physical strength. It was something deeper, something the Scifi hadn't understood about humans. Derek had fought not for glory or pride, but for his survival, for the belief that humanity had something to offer, something that couldn't be measured by strength alone. He had fought with everything he had, and it had worked. The battlefield was quiet now, the chaos of the fight replaced by an eerie stillness. The Scifi soldiers, who had once charged at him with overwhelming force, now stood in silence, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and respect. They had witnessed something that had shattered everything they had believed about humans. They had witnessed the strength of the human spirit. Ariella, standing at the edge of the battlefield, watched the scene unfold before her. Her heart raced as she saw Derek, battered and bloodied, standing tall over the fallen warrior. She had never imagined that this human, this fragile, weak human, could do something like this. He had taken on the strongest of her people and won. He had shown her that there was something about humanity that went beyond their physical limitations. There was heart. There was willpower. There was resilience. She had never seen anything like it. Ariella's steps were slow as she walked toward him, her eyes never leaving his. Derek's gaze met hers as she approached. His body ached, his muscles screamed for rest, but when he saw her walking toward him, something inside him stirred. This was the moment when everything changed. Ariella stopped in front of him, looking at him with a mix of awe and something deeper, something she couldn't quite place. She had spent her life surrounded by power, by strength, by beings who had never known weakness. But Derek had just shown her something more powerful than any force she had ever witnessed. He had shown her the strength of humanity, the strength to fight against impossible odds, to stand tall even when the world seemed to be falling apart. For the first time, Ariella realized that she had been wrong. She had underestimated Derek, and by extension, she had underestimated humanity. She had thought her people, the Scifi, were the epitome of strength. But now she saw the truth. Strength wasn't just about power. It wasn't about size or skill. It was about the will to keep going, no matter how hard it was. It was about not giving up, no matter the cost. And that was something humanity had in abundance. Derek looked at her, his breath still coming in shallow gasps. He was too tired to speak, but he didn't need to. The look in his eyes said everything. He had done it. He had survived. He had proven that he was more than just a human. He was a symbol of something greater. Ariella smiled softly, a warmth spreading through her chest as she gazed at him. She had always been surrounded by the strongest beings in the galaxy, but in this moment, she realized that true strength came from the heart. It came from the will to survive, from the drive to never give up, no matter how hopeless things seemed. "You did it," she said, her voice soft but filled with admiration. "You've shown them all." Derek nodded slowly, his exhaustion catching up to him. "I didn't do it for them," he said, his voice hoarse. "I did it for me, for humanity. We're not weak, we're not fragile, we've just never had the chance to prove it." Ariella felt a lump in her throat. She had always believed in her people. She had always believed that the Scifi were the most powerful beings in the galaxy. But now, she saw the truth. Derek had shown her something that she could never have imagined. He had shown her the strength that lay in the human spirit, the strength that came from fighting for what mattered. The Scifi soldiers, who had once believed in their own superiority, now stood in silence. They had seen the truth of what had just happened. They had witnessed Derek's fight, his refusal to give up, and his ability to rise above the odds. And for the first time, they were uncertain. They had always thought that strength was about power, about physical prowess. But Derek had proven that there was another kind of strength, a strength that came from within, a strength that couldn't be measured by weapons or armor. Ariella turned to the Scifi soldiers, her voice steady and commanding. "This human," she said, her eyes sweeping over them, "has just shown us what true strength looks like. We can no longer dismiss humanity as weak. We must learn from them. We must learn the strength of heart that they carry with them. Derek has proven that humanity has something to offer this galaxy that we can't ignore." The soldiers nodded slowly, their expressions thoughtful. For the first time, they weren't just looking at Derek as a weak human. They were looking at him with respect, with understanding. Ariella turned back to Derek, her eyes filled with admiration. "You've done more than survive," she said. "You've shown us all the power of humanity. You've changed everything." Derek smiled, though it was a tired, exhausted smile. "I just did what I had to do," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ariella stepped closer to him, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "No, Derek," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You did more than that. You proved that humanity has a place in this galaxy. You've proven that we are all stronger than we realize, and for that, I'll be forever grateful." Derek's eyes softened as he looked at her. He had never expected this. He had never expected to be standing here at the center of a galaxy-wide change. But here he was, and somehow he had done the impossible. He had shown the galaxy that humanity was more than just a race that had once been forgotten. They were strong, they were resilient, and they were ready to take their place among the stars. As the crowd of Scifi soldiers slowly began to disperse, Ariella and Derek stood together, looking out at the horizon. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the battlefield. The war was over. The challenge was complete, and humanity had won. For the first time, Ariella knew that the galaxy would never look at humans the same way again. Derek had proven that strength was not just about physical power. It was about the heart, the spirit, and the unbreakable will to survive. And in that moment, she knew that humanity had earned its place among the stars. And so, as the stars began to twinkle above them, Derek and Ariella stood side by side, knowing that their fight was just beginning. But now they were no longer alone. The galaxy had seen the strength of humanity, and nothing would ever be the same again.